The auction block smelled of whiskey and shame, and Josephine Walsh stood upon it with her chin lifted high, even as her father counted the money that had just sealed her fate to a man with rotting teeth and cruel eyes. The summer heat of 1884 bore down on the dusty street of Nome, Alaska, where the gold rush had brought not just prospectors, but every manner of desperate soul seeking fortune or fleeing ruin. Josephine's father, Gerald Walsh, had found neither fortune nor redemption in this frontier town. Instead, he had discovered gambling halls and borrowed money from men who did not forgive debts. She watched him now through eyes that burned with unshed tears, this man who had raised her after her mother died of fever 5 years past, this man who had just sold her to Monroe Hackett to settle $300 worth of gambling debts and bad decisions. "That is my daughter you are buying," Gerald said, his voice hollow, unable to meet Josephine's stare. She was 22 years old enough to understand betrayal, old enough to know that the world was sometimes darker than any nightmare. "I know what I bought," Monroe Hackett said, his smile revealing those decayed teeth that made Josephine's stomach turn. He was perhaps 50 years old, a saloon owner with a reputation for cruelty toward the women who worked for him. "She will work off your debt real nice in my establishment." The small crowd that had gathered to witness this transaction began to disperse. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with the cold curiosity of those who had seen worse in their lives. This was the frontier, after all, where law was a suggestion and morality bent to the will of whoever held the most gold or the fastest gun. Josephine felt Monroe's hand close around her wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. She tried to pull away, but he yanked her forward, causing her to stumble on the wooden platform. Her dark hair, which she had braided that morning when she still believed her father might find another way, came loose and fell across her face. "Let her go." The voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. Deep, steady, and carrying an authority that made even Monroe Hackett pause. Josephine looked up, pushing the hair from her eyes, and saw a man step forward from the shadows of the general store. He was tall, perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, and a gun belt that sat low on his hips. Everything about him spoke of someone who had spent his life outdoors, riding hard trails and sleeping under stars. "This does not concern you, stranger," Monroe said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The cowboy had the look of someone who did not make idle statements. "I am making it my concern," the stranger said, walking closer with an easy, confident stride. "How much did you pay for her?" Monroe's eyes narrowed. $300. What is it to you?" The cowboy reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch. He loosened the string and poured gold coins into his palm, counting them with practiced efficiency. "Here is $400. I am buying out your transaction." The crowd, which had been dispersing, now gathered again with renewed interest. This was unexpected entertainment in a town where most days blended together in a haze of work and drink. Gerald Walsh stepped forward, his face showing confusion and something that might have been hope or might have been calculation. "Now wait just a minute," Monroe protested. "We had a deal, and now you have a better deal," the cowboy said flatly. He held out the coins, letting them catch the afternoon light. $400 for $300 worth of debt. That is profit in anyone's arithmetic. Monroe looked at the money, then at Josephine, then back at the money. Greed warred with pride on his weathered face. Finally, greed won, as it usually did in Nome. He released Josephine's wrist and snatched the coins from the cowboy's hand, counting them quickly. When he was satisfied, he shoved the money into his own pocket and pointed a crooked finger at the cowboy. "She is your problem now," he said, then spat in the dust before walking away toward his saloon. Gerald Walsh approached the cowboy with the ingratiating smile that made Josephine feel sick. That was mighty generous of you, friend. Mighty generous indeed. I am sure my daughter will serve you well. Get out of my sight before I forget myself, the cowboy said, his voice low and dangerous. There was something in his tone that made Gerald's smile fade instantly. The older man backed away, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to leave. He disappeared into the crowd without looking back at his daughter. Josephine stood on the auction block, uncertain whether her circumstances had improved or simply changed ownership. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat, a defensive gesture that offered no real protection. The cowboy turned to look at her fully for the first time, and she was struck by the gentleness in those winter sky eyes. You can come down from there now, he said quietly. What is your name? Josephine Walsh, she answered, her voice stronger than she felt. She descended the wooden steps carefully, aware that her legs were shaking. What do you want from me? Nothing, he said simply. You are free to go wherever you wish. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? You are free, he repeated. He gestured toward the general store behind him. I need to collect my supplies, and then I am riding north to a homestead I am working to establish. You are welcome to come with me if you need a place to stay until you figure out what you want to do. Or you can walk away right now. The choice is yours. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here in front of all these watching people. Why would you do this? You do not even know me. I know enough, he said. I know that no person should be bought and sold like livestock. I know that you deserve better than what just happened to you. He extended his hand in a formal gesture. My name is August Zimmerman. I came to Alaska last spring looking for land to settle. I found a good piece of property about 15 miles north of here, near the river. She looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, honest in its simplicity. Slowly, she reached out and shook it. His grip was firm but careful, respectful. Thank you, she whispered, and those two words carried the weight of every emotion churning inside her. No thanks needed, August said. He released her hand and nodded toward the general store. I will only be a few minutes. Then we can decide what comes next. Josephine followed him to the store, staying a few steps behind, still processing what had just happened. August spoke with the shopkeeper, a round man named Henderson, who kept glancing at Josephine with poorly concealed curiosity. August purchased flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, and various other supplies, paying in cash from a wallet that appeared to still have money, despite the $400 he had just spent on her freedom. You are set for a siege, Henderson commented, packing the supplies into saddlebags. Just stocking up for the summer work, August replied easily. The homestead keeps me busy. Outside, two horses stood hitched to the rail. Both were sturdy animals, built for endurance rather than speed. One was a bay gelding with intelligent eyes, the other a gray mare with a gentle disposition evident in her calm stance. August loaded the supplies onto the bay, distributing the weight evenly. Can you ride? He asked Josephine. Yes, she said. My mother taught me when I was young. Good. The gray is named Willow. She is patient and sure-footed. He untied both horses and handed Willow's reins to Josephine. We will ride north. There is a cabin on my land. It is not fancy, but it is solid and has a good roof. You can stay there as long as you need. Josephine mounted Willow with practiced ease, grateful that this at least was a skill she had not lost, despite the years in Nome, living in rented rooms while her father gambled away every cent they had. August swung onto his bay, whose name she did not yet know, and they began riding out of town at an easy walk. People watched them go. Josephine could feel their eyes on her back, could imagine the gossip that would spread through Nome's saloons and boarding houses that evening. But with each step the horses took, the town grew smaller behind them, and she felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of fear beginning to unravel. They rode in silence for the first hour, following a trail that wound through scrubby forest and open meadows. The landscape of Alaska in late June was unexpectedly beautiful, with wildflowers dotting the grasslands and the distant mountains still showing snow on their peaks despite the summer warmth. The sun hung high in the sky, and Josephine realized with a start that it was nearly 8 o'clock in the evening, but still bright as midday. She had forgotten about the long Alaskan summer days. Have you been in Nome long? August finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 2 years, Josephine said. We came up during the gold rush. My father thought he would strike it rich. She laughed bitterly. He found card games instead. And your mother? Dead 5 years now. Fever took her back in Oregon. Josephine paused, then added, She would have been ashamed to see what happened today. That shame belongs to your father, not to you, August said firmly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. They rode on. After another hour, August led them off the main trail onto a smaller path that was barely visible in the tall grass. The terrain began to change, sloping gently downward toward the sound of running water. Trees grew thicker here, providing welcome shade from the endless daylight. The river is just ahead, August said. The cabin is on the southern bank, set back in a clearing. When they emerged from the trees, Josephine saw the homestead for the first time. It was modest but well built, a log cabin with a stone chimney and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport this far north. A small barn stood nearby, large enough for the horses and perhaps a milk cow. Behind the cabin, a garden plot showed neat rows of growing vegetables. Everything spoke of careful planning and hard work. You built all this yourself? Josephine asked, unable to hide her surprise. Most of it, August said. I had help with the barn. A few neighbors came together for a barn raising last month. He dismounted and led his bay toward the small structure. There are not many people this far out, but the ones who are here understand that we all need each other to survive. Josephine slid down from Willow and followed August into the barn. It was clean and organized, with 2 stalls, a small tack room, and a loft for hay storage. August unsaddled both horses with efficient movements, then brushed them down while Josephine watched, unsure how to help. There is a creek behind the cabin, August said as he worked. The water is cold and clean, good for drinking, good for washing. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The cabin only has 1 room right now. I have been sleeping in the loft space, and there is a bed on the main floor that I have been using for storage. You can have that space. I will stay in the loft. I do not want to displace you from your own home, Josephine protested. You are not, August said. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Listen, Josephine, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know that what I did today could look like I bought you for myself, no matter what I said about freedom. So I want to be clear. You are safe here. You can stay as long as you need, and when you are ready to move on, I will help you get wherever you want to go. I ask nothing from you except perhaps help with cooking if you are willing, since I am a terrible cook and mostly live on burned beans and dry bread. A small smile tugged at Josephine's lips despite everything. I can cook. Then we will both benefit from this arrangement, August said, returning the smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered. Come on, let me show you the cabin. The interior of the cabin was as well maintained as the exterior. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Shelves held dishes, cooking supplies, and a few books. A ladder led up to a loft space where Josephine could see a bedroll and a trunk. On the opposite side of the room, a bed frame held a mattress that was currently covered in folded fabric, tools, and other miscellaneous items. I will clear that off, August said, following her gaze. Give me just a few minutes. He worked quickly, moving everything to the loft or to storage hooks on the walls. The mattress underneath was simple but clean, stuffed with what looked like fresh straw and cotton. He brought down a quilt from the loft and spread it over the bed, then added a pillow. It is not much, he said apologetically. It is more than I had an hour ago, Josephine said quietly. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in fully. Without August's intervention, she would now be in Monroe Hackett's saloon, beginning whatever degrading work he had planned for her. Instead, she stood in a clean cabin with a bed of her own and a man who asked nothing from her. August, I need you to understand something. I have no money. I cannot pay you back what you spent. I do not want you to pay me back, August said. Money is just a tool. I used it for something that mattered. Why? Josephine asked, the question bursting out of her. Why would you do this for a stranger? $400 is a fortune. August was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the evening that still looked like afternoon, his hands clasped behind his back. 5 years ago, I had a sister, he finally said. Her name was Margaret. She was 18 years old, pretty, and full of dreams. Our father died, and our mother got sick. We needed money for medicine and food. A man came to our farm in Kansas and offered Margaret a job in a hotel in Denver. Good wages, he said, respectable work. She went, thinking she would save us. Josephine felt her heart tighten, already knowing how this story would end. It was not a hotel, August continued, his voice flat with old pain. It was a brothel. By the time I found her 6 months later, she was sick from opium they had forced on her to keep her compliant. She died in my arms, and the last thing she said was that she was sorry she had failed us. He turned back to face Josephine, and she saw the grief etched in the lines around his eyes. I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to save someone from that fate, I would take it no matter the cost. So when I saw you on that auction block, I saw Margaret, and I could not walk away. Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now, all the strength she had maintained throughout the day finally crumbling. I am so sorry. So am I, August said. But maybe some good can come from it. Maybe saving you helps balance the scales somehow, even though I know it does not bring her back. They stood in silence for a moment, two people bound together by trauma and unexpected kindness. Finally, August cleared his throat and moved toward the door. I need to bring in the supplies from the barn. Why do not you rest? Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out the routines. After he left, Josephine sat on the bed, her bed, and let herself cry properly. She cried for her mother, dead and gone. She cried for her father's betrayal. She cried for August's sister Margaret, whom she had never known but whose tragedy had saved her. And she cried for herself, for the fear and shame and uncertainty of what came next. But underneath the tears, there was also something else, the tiniest seed of hope, fragile as spring ice, that perhaps her story did not have to end in tragedy. That perhaps, against all odds, she had found something rare in this harsh frontier, genuine human decency. The next morning arrived with bright sunlight streaming through the windows, though Josephine's internal clock told her it could not possibly be morning yet. She had forgotten about the midnight sun, how it played tricks with time and sleep. Still, her body knew it had rested, and she rose feeling more clear-headed than she had in months. August was already awake, starting a fire in the stove. He looked up when she descended from the loft, and she realized with a start that he had insisted she take the main floor bed while he climbed to the loft. Another small kindness in a growing collection. Coffee? He offered. Please, Josephine said. She looked around the cabin, seeing it fresh in the new day. What needs doing around here? You do not have to work, August reminded her. I know, but I want to. She met his eyes steadily. You gave me my freedom, which means I get to choose what I do with it, and I choose to be useful while I am here. A slow smile spread across August's face. All right then. Can you really cook? Better than you, I would wager, Josephine said with a hint of her old spirit, the part of her that had not been crushed by her father's betrayal. August laughed, a warm sound that filled the cabin. That is not a high bar to clear, but I look forward to seeing what you can do. They fell into a routine over the following days. August worked on expanding the garden, repairing fence lines, and making improvements to the barn. Josephine took over the cooking, cleaning, and other household tasks. She discovered that August had not been exaggerating about his cooking skills. His pantry held basic supplies, but little creativity had been applied to them. She made stews with dried meat and vegetables, baked bread in the small oven, and even managed to create a passable berry pie from wild berries growing near the creek. August worked hard from dawn until dusk, though dawn and dusk were difficult to distinguish in the perpetual daylight. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, always announcing himself before entering the cabin, always averting his eyes when she washed her face at the basin, always treating her like an honored guest rather than someone whose freedom he had purchased. They talked during meals, sharing stories of their lives. Josephine learned that August had been a ranch hand in Kansas before his sister's death, that he had come to Alaska specifically to start fresh somewhere far from those painful memories. He was educated, having attended school through the 8th grade, and his mother had taught him to read with enthusiasm. The few books on his shelf were worn from repeated readings: a volume of poetry, a Bible, and a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. My mother loved stories, August explained one evening as they sat at the table finishing a dinner of venison stew. She said books were windows to other worlds, especially important when your own world was just a small farm in Kansas. Is she still alive? Josephine asked gently. Yes, living with my brother and his family near Topeka. I send her money when I can, and letters every few months. She worries about me up here in the wilderness, but she also understands why I needed to leave. Josephine traced a pattern in the wood grain of the table. I wish my mother had lived long enough to understand what my father became. Maybe she could have stopped him before he fell so far into gambling. Or maybe she would have just fallen with him, August said quietly. Addiction is a powerful force. It makes people into strangers. As the days passed into weeks, Josephine found herself relaxing in ways she had not realized she had been tense. The constant vigilance she had maintained in Nome, always watching for threats, always aware of her father's debts and the dangerous men to whom he owed money, began to ease. She slept deeply, worked contentedly, and discovered that she was starting to smile more easily. She also found herself watching August more than she should, watching the way he moved with easy confidence, the way his hands were both strong and gentle as he worked with the horses, the way he squinted into the sun when surveying his land. He was handsome in a weathered, practical way, but more than that, he was kind. And kindness, Josephine was learning, was far more attractive than any physical feature. One afternoon in mid-July, a visitor arrived. Josephine was in the garden picking lettuce when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. She looked up to see a woman riding a paint horse, dressed in practical work clothes, similar to Josephine's own borrowed garments. "Hello there!" the woman called out cheerfully. She was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-streaked brown hair pulled back in a braid and a friendly, open face. "You must be August's guest. I am Helen Fredericks. My husband, Tom, and I have a homestead about 5 miles west of here." "Josephine Walsh," Josephine replied, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "August is checking the fence line near the river." "I will wait then," Helen said, dismounting with practiced ease. She tied her horse to the hitching post and approached Josephine with undisguised curiosity. "I hope you do not mind me saying, but we heard about what happened in Nome. August buying your freedom from that horrible Monroe Hackett. That was a brave thing he did." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. It was kind beyond measure. "August is a good man," Helen agreed. "When we were raising our barn, he worked harder than anyone, and he would not take payment beyond a meal and some preserves." She glanced at the cabin, then back at Josephine with a shrewd look. "How are you finding life out here? It can be lonely, especially if you are used to town living. It is different, Josephine admitted, but not lonely, not with work to do, and she hesitated, then continued, and good company. Helen's smile widened. I am glad to hear it. Listen, Tom and I are having a gathering at our place this Saturday. Just a few neighbors, some music, some food, nothing fancy. But it would give you a chance to meet some folks. Would you and August like to come? I would have to ask August, Josephine said uncertainly. I do not want to presume. Presume away. August's voice came from behind them. He emerged from the tree line, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back on his head. Helen, good to see you. Likewise, Helen said. She repeated her invitation, and August accepted readily. We will be there, he confirmed. What can we bring? Just yourselves, Helen said. Though if Josephine bakes anything like what I am smelling from your cabin lately, I would not turn down a pie. After Helen left, Josephine felt nervous energy bubbling up. I have not been to a social gathering in years, she confessed to August. What if people judge me? What if they think badly of you for taking me in? Then those people are not worth knowing, August said firmly. Helen and Tom are good people. They would not have invited us if they thought there was anything improper happening, and anyone who judges you for circumstances beyond your control is showing their own character, not yours. Saturday arrived with partly cloudy skies, which felt almost dark after weeks of unbroken sunshine. Josephine had made 2 pies using precious sugar from August's stores, and she had borrowed a dress from a trunk in the loft. It had belonged to August's mother, sent up with his belongings when he moved north. The style was a few years old, but it was clean and pretty, a soft blue that brought out Josephine's eyes. When she came down from changing, August was adjusting his own clothes, a clean shirt and vest that he clearly reserved for special occasions. He looked up and went very still, his eyes widening slightly. You look beautiful, he said, then immediately looked flustered. I apologize. That was forward of me. Thank you, Josephine said softly, feeling warmth spread through her chest. You look very handsome yourself. They rode to the Fredericks' homestead together, with the pies carefully packed in saddlebags. The journey took about an hour, following trails that August seemed to know by heart. As they approached, Josephine could hear music drifting through the trees, a fiddle playing a lively tune. The Fredericks' property was larger than August's, with a substantial cabin, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A dozen people milled about in the yard, talking and laughing. Children ran between the adults, playing some complicated game that involved much shrieking and giggling. Tom Fredericks was a bear of a man, tall and broad, with a thick beard and booming voice. He welcomed them warmly, shaking August's hand and bowing over Josephine's with old-fashioned courtesy. We are glad you could come. Helen has been talking about you all week. Other neighbors introduced themselves. There were the Carlsons, a Swedish couple with 3 children. The Millers, newlyweds still in the first blush of marriage. Old Joe Weatherby, a trapper who had lived in Alaska for 40 years and had stories to prove it. And several others, all friendly, all genuinely welcoming. No one asked invasive questions about how Josephine came to be staying with August. No one looked at her with judgment or suspicion. Instead, they accepted her presence with the easy hospitality of frontier life, where everyone understood that circumstances could be complicated and survival often depended on kindness. The afternoon passed in a blur of good food, better company, and music that made Josephine's feet tap against her will. She had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community, to laugh freely, to feel safe among people. As evening approached, someone called for dancing. The fiddle player, one of the Carlson boys, struck up a reel and couples moved to the cleared area in front of the barn. August appeared at Josephine's elbow. Would you dance with me? He asked, extending his hand. Josephine hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. I am not very practiced. Neither am I, August admitted with a grin. We will muddle through together. They joined the other couples in the reel, and true to his word, August was not a graceful dancer. But he was enthusiastic and good-natured, laughing when he missed a step and steadying Josephine when she stumbled. His hand was warm in hers, and when the dance brought them close together, she could smell wood smoke and pine on his clothes. When the reel ended, a slower song began. Without speaking, August pulled Josephine into a simple waltz position. This dance was easier, requiring less fancy footwork and more simply moving together. They swayed in time to the music, and Josephine realized that at some point her heart had started beating faster, not from exertion, but from August's proximity. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and wondering, as though he was seeing her for the first time. "Josephine," he said quietly, just for her ears, "I want you to know that you can stay at the homestead as long as you want, not as a guest, as a partner if you are willing. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I value your presence. The cabin feels like a home now, not just a building. August, Josephine did not know what to say. Her heart was pulling her in a direction her head said was too soon, too fast. But when had her heart ever listened to reason? "You do not have to answer now," August said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. There is no pressure. If you want to move on, I will help you. If you want to stay just as things are, that is fine too. I just needed to say it." The song ended and they broke apart, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. Josephine felt it in the air, electric and promising. They rode home in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The sky was finally beginning to dim as late July brought the first hints that summer would eventually end and darkness would return to Alaska. Josephine found herself thinking about the future, something she had not dared to do since her father's betrayal. What did she want? Where did she want to be? The answer, she was beginning to realize, might be exactly where she already was. August helped her down from Willow when they reached the cabin, his hands gentle on her waist. For a moment they stood very close, his face just inches from hers. Josephine's breath caught. "Thank you for dancing with me," August said softly. "Thank you for inviting me," Josephine replied. Then gathering her courage, she added, "And thank you for seeing me as a partner. That means more than you know." She went inside before she could do something foolish like kiss him. But as she lay in bed that night, she touched her fingers to her lips and imagined what it might feel like if she had. The next few weeks brought subtle changes to their dynamic. Conversations lingered longer over meals. Smiles came more easily. Accidental touches seemed to happen more frequently. A brush of hands when passing dishes, shoulders bumping as they worked side by side in the garden. Neither spoke directly about what was growing between them, but it was there, undeniable as the approaching autumn. August began teaching Josephine to shoot, saying that anyone living on the frontier should know how to handle a rifle. She proved to be a decent shot after some practice, and August praised her steady hands and good eye. She taught him a card game her mother had loved, one that required strategy rather than gambling, and they played in the evenings by lamplight. One night in early August, a storm rolled in with dramatic suddenness. Thunder cracked overhead, and rain lashed against the cabin windows. Josephine was washing dishes when a particularly loud boom of thunder made her jump, nearly dropping a plate. August was beside her instantly, steadying her hands. "It is all right," he murmured. "Just a storm." "I know," Josephine said, feeling foolish. "It startled me." But August did not move away. His hands remained on hers, warm and solid. Josephine looked up at him, and in his eyes she saw everything he had not said, everything she had been feeling too, the fear of moving too fast, the wonder of connection, the hope for something more. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough, "I am trying very hard to be a gentleman, to give you space and time. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are not those of a host to a guest. They have not been for a while now." What are they? She whispered, even though she thought she knew. I am falling in love with you, August said simply. Maybe I have been since the moment I saw you standing on that auction block with your chin up and fire in your eyes. Maybe it happened slowly over these weeks of living together. But it is true either way. Josephine's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. I am falling in love with you too, she confessed. And it terrifies me. Everything in my life has been taken away. My mother, my security, my faith in my father. What if I lose this too? You might, August said honestly. Life offers no guarantees. But I promise you this. I will never betray you. I will never sell you out for my own gain. I will treat your heart as the precious thing it is. Josephine made a decision then, one that came from the deepest part of herself. She rose on her toes and kissed him, tentative and sweet. August froze for a heartbeat, then responded, his arms coming around her gently, as though she was something delicate that might break. The kiss deepened, growing from tentative to sure. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. August rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me, he said. Not as a guest, not as a cook or a housekeeper, as my partner, as the woman I love. Build this life with me. Yes, Josephine said, the word coming easily. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I love you. Yes to all of it. They kissed again, and outside the storm raged on, but inside the cabin everything was warmth and promise. They held each other as lightning flashed and thunder rolled, two people who had found each other against all odds. That night, they talked until the storm passed and the eternal summer twilight returned. They spoke of their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. August wanted to expand the homestead, perhaps add another room to the cabin, grow enough crops to sell in Nome. Josephine talked about wanting a real home, something permanent and safe, maybe even children someday if they were blessed. We should get married, August said suddenly. Properly, I mean, with a preacher and everything legal. I want the world to know that you are choosing this, choosing me, that you are here because you want to be, not because you have nowhere else to go. I would like that, Josephine said, smiling. When? Whenever you want. We could go to Nome next week, find the circuit preacher. Or we could wait, have a proper celebration with the neighbors. Next week, Josephine decided. I do not need a big celebration. I just need you and the promise we make to each other. So the following week, they rode back to Nome together. Josephine felt strange returning to the town where she had been sold, but August's presence beside her made it bearable. They went directly to the small church on the edge of town, where the circuit preacher, Reverend Michaels, agreed to marry them that very afternoon. They had no guests, except the Reverend's wife as witness, no fancy clothes beyond their Sunday best, no elaborate ceremony. But when August slipped a simple gold band onto Josephine's finger and spoke his vows with quiet conviction, she felt the weight and truth of the promise. And when she spoke her own vows, pledging her love and loyalty to this man who had saved her and then given her the freedom to choose him, she meant every word. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Michaels said with a warm smile. You may kiss your bride. August cupped Josephine's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, and she felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. These were not the tears of despair she had cried on that auction block. These were tears of happiness, of gratitude, of hope fulfilled. As they left the church, now husband and wife, they nearly collided with a figure on the street. Josephine looked up and found herself face to face with her father. Gerald Walsh looked worse than when she had last seen him, thinner and more haggard, his clothes dirty and his eyes bloodshot. Josephine, he said, and she heard surprise and something that might have been shame in his voice. You are still here. I am, she said coolly. And it is Mrs. Zimmerman now. Gerald's eyes flicked to August, then to the church behind them, then back to Josephine. You married him? The cowboy who bought you? He did not buy me. Josephine said, her voice steady. He bought my freedom, and I chose to marry him because he is a good man who treats me with respect and love. Two things you never gave me. Gerald flinched. I was desperate. Those men would have killed me. So you sacrificed me instead, Josephine said. You could have run. You could have faced the consequences of your own actions. Instead, you sold your own daughter, your only child, the last connection you had to my mother. I know, Gerald said, and to Josephine's surprise, genuine tears filled his eyes. I know, and I will regret it every day for the rest of my life. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry. August's hand found Josephine's, his fingers lacing through hers in silent support. She looked at her father, this broken man who had once been her protector and provider, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Anger, yes, hurt, definitely, but also pity, and a distant echo of the love she had once felt for him. I do not forgive you, she said finally. Not yet, and maybe not ever, but I hope you find a way to forgive yourself and become a better man. Goodbye, Father. She turned away, and August guided her down the street toward where their horses waited. Gerald did not follow or call after them. When Josephine looked back from the edge of town, he was gone, disappeared back into whatever shadows he now inhabited. Are you all right? August asked gently. I am, Josephine said, and realized it was true. Seeing her father had not destroyed her or sent her back into despair, she had faced him as a married woman, as someone who had built a new life, and she had walked away on her own terms. I am really all right. They rode home, and it truly felt like home now. The cabin welcomed them as husband and wife, and that night they consummated their marriage with tenderness and care, learning each other slowly, building intimacy with the same patience August had used to build his homestead. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs together, and Josephine felt a peace she had never known. August traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch gentle. I love you, Mrs. Zimmerman. I love you too, Mr. Zimmerman, she replied, smiling at the novelty of her new name. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again. Thank you for choosing me, August said, for seeing past the rough cowboy exterior to the man underneath. That rough cowboy exterior is part of why I fell in love with you, Josephine teased. Well, that and the fact that you are kind, hardworking, honest, and have eyes like winter sky. Eyes like winter sky? August repeated, laughing. That is the poet in you talking. Maybe I will write poetry about you, Josephine said, odes to frontier husbands. They laughed together and then kissed again, and the long Alaskan summer night passed in warmth and new beginnings. The seasons turned, as they always do. Summer faded into autumn, and the darkness returned to Alaska by increments, first just a few hours each night, then more and more until by November they lived in near constant twilight. But the darkness did not feel oppressive to Josephine. She had August beside her, and they worked together to prepare the homestead for the approaching winter. They harvested the garden, preserving vegetables in jars and storing root crops in the small cellar August had dug beneath the cabin. They cut and stacked firewood until they had enough to heat the cabin through the coldest months. August hunted and brought home moose meat, which they smoked and salted. Josephine sewed warm clothes and quilts, preparing for temperatures that could drop to deadly levels. The neighbors gathered for a final celebration before winter isolated them all on their individual homesteads. At the Fredericks place, they shared food and drink and stories, promising to check on each other when possible, but knowing that there might be weeks at a time when travel would be impossible. Helen pulled Josephine aside during the gathering, her eyes twinkling with knowledge. You have a glow about you, she said. Are you with child? Josephine blushed. She had suspected, but had not been certain. I think so, It is early yet. How wonderful, Helen exclaimed, then lowered her voice. And how do you feel about it? I know your marriage was quick by some standards. I feel blessed, Josephine said honestly. Scared too, but blessed. A year ago, I could not have imagined being this happy. August is a lucky man, Helen said, squeezing her hand, and that baby will be lucky too, to have parents who love each other so much. Josephine told August that night as they rode home under the emerging stars. He was quiet for a long moment, and she worried that perhaps the news was too much, too soon. Then he stopped his horse, dismounted, and pulled her down from Willow into a fierce embrace. A baby, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby! Josephine, you have given me everything I never dared hope for. We gave this to each other, Josephine corrected gently. A family, a future, a love that is real and lasting. Winter came hard and cold, with snow piling high around the cabin and winds that howled like living things. But inside, the cabin was warm and cozy. Josephine's belly grew round with their child, and August treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worrying about her comfort. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. I am pregnant, not dying, she told him one evening in January as he fussed about whether she should be carrying water from the creek. I know, August said sheepishly. I just want everything to be perfect for you and the baby. Everything is perfect, Josephine assured him. We have food, warmth, shelter, and love. What more could we need? They passed the long winter nights reading aloud to each other, playing cards and talking about the future. August wanted to build a separate bedroom before the baby came, carving it out of the loft space. Josephine wanted to plant a larger garden in the spring, maybe even start some flowers around the cabin. They discussed names for the baby, settling on Samuel if it was a boy, after August's father, and Clara if it was a girl, after Josephine's mother. In February, when the worst of the winter was past but spring was still distant, Josephine went into labor. August rode through dangerous conditions to fetch Helen, who had experience as a midwife. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when August, pacing outside in the snow, feared he might lose both his wife and child. But Josephine was strong, stronger than even she had known. After 18 hours of labor, just as dawn broke on a clear February morning, she delivered a healthy baby boy. Samuel August Zimmerman came into the world crying lustily, his face red and his fists waving indignantly at the cold air. August held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. He is perfect, he whispered. Josephine, you are amazing. You brought our son into the world. We brought him into the world, Josephine said tiredly but happily. Together, like everything else. Helen stayed for a week, helping Josephine recover and teaching her the basics of caring for a newborn. By the time she left, Josephine felt more confident, though still overwhelmed by the enormous responsibility of this tiny life that depended on her completely. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and generally content. He had his father's blue eyes and what looked like it would be his mother's dark hair. August was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, changing nappies without complaint, and spending long hours just staring at his son with wonder. I never thought I would have this, he told Josephine one night as they lay in bed, with Samuel sleeping in a cradle August had built nearby. A family of my own. After Margaret died, I thought maybe I did not deserve happiness. Everyone deserves happiness, Josephine said firmly. And you more than most, because you give so much to others. You saved me, August. You gave me back my life, and now we have this beautiful life together. Spring returned, and with it came new energy. August built the additional bedroom he had promised, working in the long daylight hours while Josephine cared for Samuel and managed the household. Neighbors began visiting again as the trails cleared, and everyone wanted to see the new baby. Tom and Helen brought gifts, hand-carved toys, and blankets Helen had sewn. The Carlsons brought preserves and bread. Old Joe Weatherby brought a small rocking horse he had whittled during the long winter, its details exquisite. For when the boy is bigger, Joe said gruffly, trying to hide his pleasure when Josephine exclaimed over the beauty of the toy. Every child should have a good horse, even if it does not move. Summer came again, and Josephine marveled at how much had changed in a single year. Last summer she had been sold on an auction block. This summer, she was a wife and mother, working beside her husband to build a thriving homestead. They planted a larger garden, expanded the barn to accommodate a milk cow August had traded for, and even talked about building a proper house someday, something with multiple rooms and perhaps even a second story. Samuel grew rapidly, his personality emerging. He was curious and active, always wanting to explore. By his first birthday in February of 1886, he was walking and getting into everything. Josephine found herself constantly chasing after him, while August laughed at their son's antics. "He has your determination," August told Josephine as she retrieved Samuel from trying to climb into the wood box for the third time that day. "And your stubbornness," Josephine retorted, but she was smiling. That spring brought surprising news. A letter arrived via a supply wagon from Nome, addressed to Josephine in handwriting she did not recognize. She opened it carefully, with August watching curiously. The letter was from her father. Gerald Walsh wrote that he had stopped gambling and drinking 6 months earlier, with help from Reverend Michaels. He had found steady work as a clerk in a trading post and was slowly paying back his debts. He did not ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. He simply wanted Josephine to know that he was trying to become a better man and that he thought of her often with regret and pride. He had heard through town gossip that she was married with a son, and he wished her all the happiness in the world. Josephine read the letter twice, then handed it to August. When he finished, he looked at her questioningly. "How do you feel about this?" "I do not know," Josephine admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it, to let him stay in the past where he belongs. But another part of me wonders if people can really change." "Some can," August said. "It is not easy, and it takes real work and humility. But it is possible." He paused, then added, "What do you want to do?" Josephine thought for a long moment, watching Samuel play with his wooden blocks on the floor. "I want to write back," she finally said. "Not to reconcile, not yet, maybe never, but to acknowledge his effort. To let him know that I am truly happy and that while I have not forgiven him, I am not carrying the anger anymore. It is not for his sake, it is for mine." She wrote a brief letter, carefully worded. She told her father about her life, about August, and Samuel, about the homestead. She said that while the past could not be undone, she hoped he would continue on his better path. She did not sign it with love, but she signed it, and that was something. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of frontier life. Winters came and went, each one a challenge that the Zimmerman family met and overcame. Summers brought hard work, but also joy, picnics by the creek, and gatherings with neighbors who had become dear friends. In 1887, Josephine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Margaret, honoring both Josephine's mother and August's sister. Clara was a gentle, thoughtful child, quieter than her boisterous older brother, but with a deep well of feeling. In 1889, another son arrived, James Thomas, named for no one in particular but loved no less for it. James was the comedian of the family, always finding ways to make his siblings and parents laugh. The homestead grew and prospered. August added rooms to the cabin, transforming it into a proper house with bedrooms for the children and a parlor for receiving guests. They acquired more livestock, chickens, a second cow, even a few pigs. The garden expanded to cover nearly an acre, producing enough vegetables to feed the family and trade with neighbors. Josephine discovered a talent for preserving food, her jams and pickles becoming sought after throughout the small community. August's reputation as a fair and hardworking man spread, and he was sometimes called upon to help settle disputes between neighbors or advise new settlers on surviving the harsh climate. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the skills they would need for frontier life. Samuel, at age 7, could already milk a cow and split kindling. Clara, at 5, helped her mother in the garden and the kitchen. Little James, barely 2, mostly got in the way, but with such cheerful enthusiasm that no one minded. One evening, in the summer of 1891, as they sat outside watching the endless twilight, Josephine leaned against August's shoulder and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day you saw me on the auction block?" "Sometimes," August admitted. "I think about how close you came to a terrible fate, but mostly I think about how grateful I am that I was there, that I had the means to intervene, that you gave me a chance." "I gave you a chance?" Josephine said, laughing. "You saved my life." "You saved mine too," August said seriously. "Maybe not as dramatically, but just as truly. After Margaret died, I was hollow inside. I went through the motions of living, but I was not really alive. You brought me back to life, Josephine. You and our children, this home we built together. You gave me a reason to hope again." Josephine kissed him, a sweet kiss that still carried the spark of attraction even after 7 years of marriage. "I love you, August Zimmerman." "I love you too, Josephine Zimmerman. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we are given." Their children came running then, Samuel chasing Clara while James toddled after them both, and the moment of quiet reflection dissolved into the cheerful chaos of family life. August caught Samuel mid-run, tossing him up in the air while the boy shrieked with delight. Josephine scooped up James before he could trip over a root, while Clara settled beside her, catching her breath. These were the moments that mattered, Josephine thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though those had their place in the story. But the everyday moments, the laughter and love, the small kindnesses, and shared work, this was what made a life worth living. In 1893, a surprising visitor arrived. Tom Fredericks rode up to the Zimmerman homestead with a stranger in tow, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and hesitant smile. It took Josephine a moment to recognize him, but when she did, her breath caught. "Father," she said quietly. Gerald Walsh climbed down from his horse, moving carefully like someone who had aged beyond his years. "Hello, Josephine. I apologize for arriving unannounced. Tom was kind enough to guide me here." August appeared from the barn, alerted by the sound of voices. His eyes narrowed when he saw Gerald, but he said nothing, waiting for Josephine to take the lead. "Why are you here?" Josephine asked. She was not angry, just curious. They had exchanged a few letters over the years, stilted and formal, but she had never expected him to seek her out in person. "I wanted to see you," Gerald said simply, "and to apologize properly, face to face. I have written it down, but words on paper are not the same as saying them while looking you in the eye." He took a shaky breath. "Josephine, I sold you. I took my own daughter, the child my beloved wife gave me, and I sold you to a monster to pay my gambling debts. There is no excuse for what I did. I was a coward and a failure as a father. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I have spent every day since working to become someone who would not do such a thing. I am sober now, 4 years without a drink or a bet. I have paid back my debts. I have tried to help others who struggle with addiction. It does not erase what I did, but maybe it means something." Josephine looked at this broken man who had once been her father, and she felt a complicated tangle of emotions. The wound he had inflicted would never fully heal, but it had scarred over, become part of her history rather than her present. She had built a good life despite him, and that life had taught her that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. "I appreciate you coming here," she said finally, and I appreciate your honesty. I cannot say that I forgive you completely. The trust you broke was too fundamental for that. But I can say that I do not hate you anymore, and I hope you continue on your better path. That is more than I deserve, Gerald said, his voice thick. Thank you. Samuel and Clara had been watching from the porch, curious about this stranger. Gerald saw them, and his eyes filled with tears. Are those your children? Yes, Josephine said. Samuel is 9, Clara is 7, and James is 4. Children, this is your grandfather, Gerald. Can he meet them? Gerald asked hesitantly. Just for a moment. I would understand if you said no. Josephine looked at August, who gave a small nod. It was her decision, his gesture said, and he would support whatever she chose. She called the children over and introduced them to their grandfather. Gerald shook hands with Samuel very formally, smiled at Clara, and bent down to James's level, offering him a handshake that the 4-year-old took with great seriousness. You have a beautiful family, Gerald said to Josephine and August. You have built something wonderful here. He stayed for dinner at Josephine's invitation. The conversation was somewhat awkward, with long silences and careful topics, but it was not hostile. Gerald told them about his work at the trading post, about the men he had helped find sobriety, about the small cabin he had rented in Nome. He did not ask for a place in their lives or try to overstep his bounds. He simply shared his present reality and expressed his hope for continued improvement. When he prepared to leave, with Tom ready to guide him back to town, Gerald shook August's hand. Thank you for saving my daughter when I failed her. Thank you for giving her the life she deserves. She saved herself, August said quietly. She just needed someone to give her the chance. After they left, Josephine stood on the porch, watching them disappear into the trees. August came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Are you all right? Yes, Josephine said, leaning back into his embrace. I am. That was strange and difficult, but also necessary, I think. I am glad he came. It gives me closure, in a way letters never could. Will you see him again? August asked. Maybe, Josephine said. Eventually? Not often, but maybe occasionally. He is my father, and he is trying. I cannot erase the past, but I do not have to let it poison my future either. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that comprise any life. In 1895, Josephine gave birth to their 4th child, a daughter named Rose. In 1897, August's mother passed away peacefully in Kansas, and August traveled south for the funeral, taking Samuel with him so his eldest son could meet his grandmother one last time. The children grew into capable young people. Samuel showed a talent for working with wood and metal, creating tools and furniture that were both functional and beautiful. Clara developed a love of learning, reading every book she could get her hands on and teaching her younger siblings. James was the social one, making friends easily and always organizing games and adventures. Rose, the baby, was doted on by everyone and developed a cheerful confidence as a result. The homestead became one of the most prosperous in the region. August and Josephine were known as fair and generous neighbors, always ready to help others in need. They remembered their own difficult beginning and paid that kindness forward whenever possible. In 1899, Gerald Walsh died quietly in his sleep. The news reached the Zimmerman homestead via a letter from Reverend Michaels, who wrote that Gerald had been a changed man in his final years, helping many others find sobriety and faith. He had left what little money he had saved to a fund for helping those struggling with addiction. Josephine cried when she heard the news, surprising herself with the depth of her grief. August held her while she wept, understanding that she was mourning not just the man her father had become, but the father he might have been all along if not for his demons. He did his best in the end, August said gently. That counts for something. I know, Josephine said. I am glad I let him meet the children. I am glad I did not hold on to the anger forever. Life is too short for that. They buried Gerald in the small cemetery near Nome with Josephine and August and the children in attendance. It was a simple service, but it was respectful, and Josephine felt that some old wound finally closed completely. The new century arrived with hope and celebration. The Zimmerman family gathered with their neighbors to mark the momentous occasion of 1900, looking back on how far they had come and forward to what the future might bring. Samuel was now 18, a man grown, working the homestead alongside his father and courting one of the Carlson daughters. Clara was 16, teaching younger children to read and considering becoming a real teacher. James at 13 was still finding his path, but he was good-hearted and clever. Rose at 5 was the joy of the family. Josephine, now 38 years old, looked around at the life she had built and felt profound gratitude. 16 years ago, she had stood on an auction block, certain her life was over. Instead, it had been a new beginning, painful as birth, but ultimately miraculous. August, now 43, caught her eye across the crowded room where they were celebrating with neighbors, and he smiled at her with all the love and devotion he had shown since that first day. She smiled back, her heart full. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, August and Josephine sat together in their parlor, the one they had built with their own hands and filled with memories. "What are you thinking about?" August asked, noticing her reflective expression. "Everything," Josephine said. "How strange life is. How one moment, one decision can change everything. If you had not been in Nome that day, if you had walked past the auction block, if you had not had the money or the courage to intervene, my life would be so different." "But I was there," August said, "and I had the money, though I would have found a way even if I did not. And I could not walk past, not after Margaret. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was chance, but I am grateful for it every day." "So am I," Josephine said. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together as they had done thousands of times over the years. "You bought my freedom, August. But more than that, you showed me what freedom really meant. Not just being able to walk away, but being able to choose. I chose you. I chose this life. And I would choose it again and again and again." "As would I," August said. He pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something lasting. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and triumphs. Samuel would marry and eventually take over much of the homestead work as August aged. Clara would indeed become a teacher, opening a small school for the scattered children of the region. James would discover a talent for storytelling and trading, becoming a successful merchant. Rose would grow into a confident young woman with her mother's determination and her father's kindness. August and Josephine would have grandchildren, many of them filling the house with noise and love. They would grow old together, their hair graying, their bodies moving more slowly, but their love remaining strong. They would sit on the porch in the endless summer light and the deep winter darkness, holding hands and remembering the incredible journey they had taken together. On a summer evening in 1920, when Josephine was 58 and August 63, they watched the sun hover on the horizon, refusing to set, bathing everything in golden light. They were great-grandparents now, and the homestead had been divided among their children, though the original cabin remained theirs, a sanctuary for two people who had earned their rest. "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Josephine asked. "When you brought me here?" "I told you that you were free," August said, "and that I asked nothing from you." "You did ask something, though," Josephine said, smiling at him. "You asked me to see you, to know you, to love you. And I did. Oh, how I did. And I loved you right back," August said. "From that first moment when I saw fire in your eyes, even in your darkest hour, I was lost. You were the bravest person I had ever met. We were brave together, Josephine corrected. You were brave enough to help a stranger. I was brave enough to trust again after being betrayed. We were brave enough to build this life, to raise our children, to weather every storm. Together, always together. August kissed her, as sweet and tender as the first kiss they had shared in this very cabin 36 years earlier. Together, he agreed, for whatever time we have left, and beyond, if there is anything after. They sat together as the sun finally began its brief dip toward the horizon, knowing it would rise again in just a few hours. The endless cycle of light and dark, of seasons changing, of life continuing. They had built something that would outlast them, children who loved well, grandchildren who knew their story, a community that was stronger for their presence. But more than any of that, they had found each other. In a time and place where life was hard and happiness was not guaranteed, they had created a love story that began with the worst of circumstances and ended with the best of outcomes. August had bought Josephine's freedom and asked for nothing, and in return, she had given him everything: her heart, her trust, her loyalty, and her love. It was more than either of them had dared hope for on that dusty street in Nome, Alaska, in the summer of 1884. But they had claimed it together, worked for it together, and now they enjoyed it together. As the years rolled into the 1920s, August and Josephine remained the heart of their large, loving family. Though their bodies aged and movement became harder, their spirits remained strong, and their love for each other only deepened with time. They had become legendary in the region, their story told and retold as an example of frontier kindness and enduring romance. Samuel's eldest son, August Jr., named for his grandfather, would often visit and ask to hear the story of how his grandparents met. No matter how many times they told it, he never tired of hearing about the cowboy who bought a woman's freedom on an auction block, and the brave woman who chose to build a life with him. "Tell it again, Grandma," he would beg, and Josephine would smile and begin once more, with August adding details she missed, the two of them finishing each other's sentences the way couples who have been together for decades can do. Their legacy was not just in the land they had tamed or the homestead they had built, though those were significant achievements. Their legacy was in the love they had modeled for their children and grandchildren, showing that even in the harshest of circumstances, kindness and compassion could flourish, that people could change and heal, that love, true love, was worth fighting for and working toward every single day. In the summer of 1925, on their 41st wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise celebration. The house and yard filled with family and friends, people whose lives August and Josephine had touched over the decades. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories and tears of joy. August, now 68 but still strong, pulled Josephine, 63 and still beautiful in his eyes, onto the makeshift dance floor. They waltzed slowly to a fiddle tune, and everyone stopped to watch this couple who had weathered so much together and emerged not just intact, but thriving. "I would do it all again," August whispered in her ear. "Every hard winter, every difficult day, every challenge, as long as it meant ending up here with you." "As would I," Josephine whispered back, tears of happiness streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You were worth the wait, August Zimmerman. You were worth everything." They danced on as the summer sun hung in the sky, refusing to set, bathing them all in endless golden light. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build, August and Josephine Zimmerman knew they had achieved something rare and precious. They had found true love in the wilderness. They had built a life of meaning and purpose. And they had proven that even the darkest beginning could lead to the brightest ending, if you had courage, compassion, and someone to share the journey with you. Their story, which began with betrayal and desperation on a dusty auction block in Nome, Alaska, ended with love and fulfillment, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren playing in the yard of the homestead they had carved from wilderness, with two hearts still beating as one after more than 4 decades together. It was, in every sense, a life well lived and a love well earned. And as August and Josephine held each other close under the midnight sun, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, as they always had, as they always would, united in the promise they had made to each other all those years ago in a small church, witnessed by God and each other, to love, honor, and cherish for as long as they both should live. And they did, right up until the end, when August passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928, with Josephine holding his hand. She followed him just 2 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Her last words, a whisper of his name and a smile of recognition, as though she could see him waiting for her. They were buried side by side in the family plot on the homestead, under a shared headstone that read simply, August and Josephine Zimmerman. Together in life, together in death, together forever. And the homestead they had built continued on, generation after generation, a lasting testament to what love could accomplish against all odds.